Of course, feel free to use the chat function on the right-hand side. And any questions in advance for Christine, very welcome. So I will introduce Christine. I've actually known Christine for some number of years through my work at the Committee for Food Security in Rome. Christine and I were working on a UN Food Systems Summit a few weeks ago, and it really just reminded me of how similar Christine's organization is to that of the mission of WOMAG here in Asia. And Christine has really done so much for bringing about the voice of youth in our industry and in agriculture. And has done that primarily through her organization, Thought for Food, which is a kind of global non-profit pioneering agri-food tech innovation in the industry. Collectively, she's raised over $200 million for 60 ventures as part of that organization, and has hosted a community and developed a community of 30,000 young people, millennials, Gen Z, entrepreneurs from over 175 countries. So it's really, I mean, really broad-based, really impactful. And I thought it would just be great for her to share that story with us today and with the WOMAG community here in Asia. Beyond that, Christine has a long career in agribusiness, primarily, of course, at Syngenta in Switzerland, was head of corporate affairs. And that's where it was within Syngenta that she had the idea for food. She now is the advisory committee of the UN Food Summit of 2021. So one other thing that we have in common, Christine and I, it feels like we've known each other our lives, because we have the same late night dancing mentor, a gentleman called Brian Lowry, who parades us through the streets of Rome in the middle of the night dancing to Barbra Streisand's songs. So based on that connection, we're going to play a video first so everyone can get an idea on Thought for Food and the kind of organization it is. Thanks.
How's it going? Can you tell us a little bit about your project?
Hello, world! We're here to change the world and have fun while we're doing it.
Time for fun!
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for accommodating Swiss schedule and having me here today to talk about next-gen perspectives on food and agriculture. First of all, I just want to do a shout out. I see a few TFFers have tuned in. Thank you so much. And some friends like Megan, who I used to work with in previous jobs. It's really a small world when it comes down to it. And I'm here today not to talk so much about what I usually talk about, which is like the startups and innovations shaping the future of ag, but to actually talk about the people and the values and mindsets that are shifting the future of agriculture. So I'm going to talk about the next generations. And if you can maybe get started with the slides. So over the past 10 years, I've built the Thought for Food organization, and it has gone beyond anything I ever expected it to do. Basically, 10 years ago, I was working in a big agribusiness company, traveling the world, attending meeting after meeting, talking about this ominous world of 2050, where there's going to be an expected 10 billion people living on a hotter planet. And I was frustrated because I was seeing the same types of conversations being held by the same types of people, usually older white men who wouldn't be alive in 2050. And I one day left one of those meetings thinking to myself, how do I bring more creativity, more energy, and more perspectives from the people who will be alive in 2050 into these discussions? And it is kind of cliche, but together with some friends in a pub on the back of a napkin, we started to map out what has now become the Thought for Food organization. And we built the Thought for Food organization not as something that was kind of a tokenistic youth organization. It was truly built to tap into the unique mindsets and values of young people, because this is the generation that I'm part of. I'm a late stage millennial, but really looking at like how today's young people have been hardwired and how a program could really unleash their potential. But let's talk about some of the characteristics and attributes of our next generations. I've had the past decade to really work with all of these young leaders all around the world and understand what makes them tick. And I've also done a lot of like research and studied the literature about the next generations. And I just want to say that every generation is shaped by world, events and phenomenons that happen in their lifetime. And actually the concept of generation is a little bit blurry itself. Some people put like hard dates around generations, but in fact, it's really how a group of people, usually within a 10-year time frame, are shaped by, events and experiences and phenomenons during their lifetimes, especially during their formative years, which is around that like 16 to 25 time frame. And so if you look at who comprises the millennial generation, next slide, you can see that, they've grown up in a world that has been, described by kind of many economists. And I think it was originally coined by the US military as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The rate of change has accelerated in a way that was unprecedented. Previous generations would have seen, definitely leaps of progress, but that rate of progress, those changes are coming not in a 5 or 10 year kind of cadence, but almost in a monthly cadence. So this has hardwired millennials to be not only masters of change, but also makers of change. Millennials are described as the change-making generation, highly purpose-driven. So millennials are also, by and large, and this is again, globally applicable, these types of characteristics. It's not just something that applies to like US or European millennials, but the point is that there's a lot of like purpose mindset over just like trying to do work for a paycheck. Very idealistic, which aligns with that purpose mindset, and true global citizens. And one of the most defining characteristics of the millennial generation is the fact that they grew up with the internet. And the thing, and we'll get to this on the next slide, but the thing that kind of makes the difference between millennials and Gen Zs is that for millennials, especially older ones like me, the internet came at those formative years, but it's not like we're native to digital connectivity. But it has shaped a lot of our experiences in life. And like it or not, we have had the opportunity to be connected to people, ideas, and experiences from all over the world, which has actually created in millennials this open-mindedness and openness to diversity. Millennials have also forged, again, whether by choice or by necessity, kind of new ways of working in the world. And that has come to fruition through kind of new paradigms like the sharing economy and the gig economy and entrepreneurship. Now, for millennials, entrepreneurship has, especially in kind of Western markets, was seen as kind of like something to aspire to. And, back in the day, it was like Mark Zuckerberg and Silicon Valley were the good guys, but it was this seen as like, drop out of school, make a startup, do something cool. Now, of course, you see that there has been a lot of economic downturn, actually the kind of back-to-back economic crises that millennials have experienced have also made looking for unconventional type of work, a necessity. And that is also applicable all over the world. Millennials comprise the largest portion of the population. If you go to the next slide, following in their footsteps closely are Gen Zs. And Gen Zs exhibit a lot of similar characteristics to millennials, but they're also markedly different. So these are the true digital natives. Gen Zs are the ones who have never known a world without technology, right? And so, of course, there is such a thing as the digital divide. It's a very real phenomenon. But you are seeing that for people who have access, this has been a hugely shaping part of their life. Very pragmatic Gen Zs as compared to the idealism of millennials, highly multitasking, again, a little bit due to being kind of like factory wired in the new way that digital connectivity makes us, right? Short attention spans, doing multiple things at once. This also applies to work, whereas millennials are founding companies, Gen Zs are founding multiple companies and at an earlier age. You're seeing people starting at 15, 16 years old, you know, going into kind of like major life-changing experiences. Very driven for success, looking a lot at each other online, looking at their, you know, older millennial counterparts and saying, I need to do something, whether that be, you know, be an Instagram influencer or do something more world-changing like join the Google Science Fair or start a startup. Also very demanding. Gen Zs are the activist generations by and large. They're not standing for the kind of you know, situations that previous generations have forged. You see a lot of this, you know, coming to the fore in terms of global conversations around climate change. And this is also a big difference in terms of how they view the tech and entrepreneurs that millennials were kind of aspiring to be. They're now saying, hey, you have messed things up, Mark Zuckerberg, who I mentioned previously. And there tends to also be more of privacy. So less inclined to be open on social media and open and sharing about every part of their life because they've seen some of the you know, missteps that have happened either by big tech or by millennials kind of being called out for things that they shared in open forums. So Gen Zs are a little bit like more pragmatic and more private, if you will, almost like the more mature versions, even though they are younger in terms of how they're approaching life and social media and work. But they're really, really fed up with the state of the world in general and not looking towards kind of the traditional way of creating change, whether that be through intrapreneurship or policy change. This is truly an activist-based generation. And now comes Generation Alpha. So Generation Alpha are very, very young. So nobody really knows what is going to define this generation, but there has been some media coverage saying, let's not call them Generation Alpha, let's call them Gen C, because we are already seeing that COVID is going to be a defining moment in this generation's lifetime. Now, Gen C are also, or Gen Alpha, are also true digital natives, but they're extremely technology literate in ways that generations before have not been. And so you're seeing people really deeply understanding technology and understanding how to build and use technologies in ways that, you know, previous generations haven't been able to. They're also, and this is a developed country perspective, but much more well educated. Now, that doesn't mean that that won't translate into opportunities around the world due to, of course, digital access and kind of new models of education. But certainly in places like the United States, you're seeing that the Gen Alpha is achieving higher levels of education in a formal system. They're also intersectional by nature. So, you know, growing up with the diversity that previous generation, well, that has been kind of normal because of the numbers, right, of people and the global connectivity and the amount of diversity that exists in the world. Gen Alpha is actually seeing things through this like kind of systemic lens and seeing how dots can connect and also seeing issues as very related and intersectional to each other. And I just wanted to say that while most of the media is covering Gen Alpha as Gen C because of COVID, there's a whole bunch of Cs actually that are defining this generation. COVID, climate change, conflict, whether that be conflict happening in their own countries or conflict that they are seeing now happening through social media feeds. Conflict is a day-to-day reality for today's young people. I put crypto here because of, not just because of crypto, I mean, time will tell, but this kind of decentralization of, you know, institutions and this new approach to what money means is definitely changing and will be something that is going to define Gen Z going forward and community. So because of COVID, this whole concept of community.
I need help.
Yeah? Sorry? Okay. This whole concept of community is kind of shaping up a little bit differently. People are now not only seeking out online communities, but are actually looking towards, you know, nurturing the communities that are in their localities. Because, you know, when I grew up, it was like, there was this kind of, you took for granted, you could live anywhere in the world and hop on a plane and go home easily and, you know, no second thought. But COVID has certainly changed that mindset. And so you're seeing kind of a resurgence of people like caring more about their localities and their families. And so these are some of the other C's that came to mind. And I'm sure there's some other things that you can think of that will be life defining for these generations. And so these are some high level perspectives on generations. Of course, every individual is, you know, different. But these are kind of like high level, you know, if you will, generalizations of like how you can look at these generations. But the point is, while some people think that today's young people are, you know, nice and, you know, or maybe even they're misunderstood. You do see a lot of negative press, particularly around millennials, as being entitled and narcissistic and very demanding and unable to commit to anything. But when I see these characteristics, I see opportunity. So if you go to the next slide, I see that we have now of all time, but also the most globally connected, well-educated, entrepreneurially minded, tech-savvy, socially engaged generations the world has ever seen. And when you look at the challenges that we face, such as how are we going to feed 10 billion people, and you see that agriculture is the least digitized industry sector that there is, and that the average age of our world's farmers is over 60 years old, I look at these characteristics and I think this is exactly the connection we need to make. It's not just because it's young people's future that is at stake. It's actually because today's young people come hardwired with the exact characteristics that we need to solve the big challenges we face in new ways. And what we need to do is create space for them to bring their ideas of solutions and their approaches to the table. And we need to allow those to build roots and take shape so that new systems can emerge that are better than what we have now. Because what we have now has gotten us this far, but it's no longer fit for purpose. So if you want to create the future, who better than to do it with than the people who are building it? So let's, and I say that a lot to companies because they care about innovation, they care about their long-term license to operate. So engaging with today's next generations is an extremely smart strategic move to make. You will get insights and antennas into the future, and you will get that competitive edge because you will have all of the capabilities that young people bring to the table. You know, you will have that opportunity to gain traction from that. I believe that today's young people, next slide, are a force for innovation. So let's leverage that force. And so now I want to talk about, again, not the solutions, but kind of the new way of thinking that we can bring into food and ag by adopting a next-gen innovation mindset. If you go to the next slide, this is a field of agriculture. And this is how we always look at fields. When you look at this, you see kind of like what we are trained to see. The human eye actually is only capable of seeing things in the RGB spectrum. But if we embrace some of the characteristics that, you know, the next generation open-mindedness, we can see a field in a whole new way. And if you look at the next slide, this is a field as seen through a multispectral sensor. A multispectral sensor allows you to see the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And it got me excited. I was actually at one of our summits, our TFF summits, which you saw a little bit of like our energy in the opening video. And I was talking to young people, and we were talking about, feeding the future. And it was an extremely diverse group of people. And they weren't just seeing the perspectives that we normally see, the field in the RGB spectrum. They were connecting their ideas and sharing their experiences and unleashing all kinds of new insights that go beyond the black and white into this whole rainbow of opportunities, which we now call multispectral thinking, equipping our minds with the capability to see a new spectrum of opportunities. This is what's going to take us to the future innovation paradigm. And young people are that way to equip ourselves with multispectral thinking. And so what are some of the actions that you can take as an innovator in food and ag to be like a multispectral thinker? Well, the first is seeking out nuance. So to date, so many of the topics that we have been, thinking about in food and ag have been seen in these polarized organic versus GMO, indigenous knowledge versus high-tech approaches. But if you can seek nuance, you can start to say, how can we connect some of the ideas from these disparate fields in new ways, combine and to create something new? And so Ginkgo Bioworks, a company in Boston, which is, led by Millennials. I actually am from, the competing high school to their CEO, who's like, just a really great person. They have set up something called the Ginkgo Creative Residency. And the Ginkgo Creative Residency, this is a science-based R&D company, and I'm sure most of you know them, but they just signed a big collaboration with Sumitomo and are doing some great things in the ag space. But in their creative residency, they're actually inviting artists and designers to come into their company and inform them on some of their, innovation opportunities. This has, nothing to do with kind of their core business, but it gives them this leading edge from completely disparate fields that helps them see things in new ways. Again, like a multispectral sensor, by inviting diverse and underrepresented voices and new perspectives into how you're thinking about challenges, you can see exciting possibilities. And so another way, of course, to seek nuance is to diversify how you consume media, to make sure that you're not trapped in a filter bubble on, your social media networks, that you're always talking to new people and, having an open mind. And again, if you look back at the characteristics of today's young people, like it or not, a lot of them are naturally operating in this way. But regardless of our age or position in life, we can train ourselves to be able to be open-minded and to seek nuance and diversity. Next slide. Another characteristic of how we can innovate in new directions that I see as a key part of next gen innovation is flipping dilemmas. So how do you say, a dilemma such as, can vegans ever eat meat? Well, to a, next gen innovator, this is a dilemma that can be flipped, because we can make meat that doesn't have animal involvement. We can have, milk and cheese without animals. And so this is something that next gen innovators are constantly exploring, is like these trade-offs and these dilemmas that have existed in previous generations. They're flipping into win-win opportunities. And they're asking what if questions. What if we could do this? How could we do this? Why not? It are questions that you see. And there's some like skills that you can use to help you flip dilemmas. One is like really using a lens from another domain. So I mentioned, Ginkgo Creative Residency is inviting artists and designers into their science-based company. But, if you're working in a specific field, think about like, how would a activist think about my problem? How would a policymaker think about my problem? How would a young person think about that problem? And actually even, role play. And this can help you to identify consequences, and especially unintended consequences, so that you can develop those into the solutions from the very outset. And, you're seeing like more and more kind of R&D happening in the tech world where unintended consequences have happened. Now they're inviting, and I'm speaking now specifically of Jack Dorsey from Twitter. He never set out when he built Twitter to have this platform be a force for political discord. And that happened. And, he made a lot of mistakes. But something interesting that Twitter is doing is now he's saying, like, I'm inviting social scientists, anthropologists, ethicists to come in and inform our product R&D so that when we launch new products, we can be aware of consequences intended and unintended, and not, hopefully avoid some of the negative mishaps that have happened that have, created so many problems in the world. So again, that next gen lens is looking at dilemmas as opportunities to be flipped, to look for solutions and win-wins. And you do that by exploring new questions and actually, kind of inviting new perspectives to the table. And then the third next gen innovator skill is around building bridges. And once you've been able to seek nuance, and so you understand more of an issue from more perspectives, and you have been able to see that, hey, this doesn't need to be a dilemma, I can find an opportunity for win-win, then you're in a great position to do the third skill, which is actually the hardest, which is to build bridges. And this is about building bridges with people who think differently than you, maybe are diametrically opposed to you, maybe are your major competitors or adversaries in the market. But if you can build bridges, you can allow new multispectral solutions to emerge. The first skill to build bridges is about being vulnerable. And that's really hard to do. But again, our paradigm of previous generations has been very much about individualism and ego. But the new paradigm is about actually collectivism and finding ways to be vulnerable. And it's actually seen as a strong leadership skill of the 21st century, is showing vulnerability can be an actual strength. I know that sounds like it's a, contradiction, but it actually is something that the next generations are looking for in leadership. It's about asking questions instead of providing answers. So instead of entering, difficult discussions or debates with like, here's why my answer is right, here's the science behind this, let me tell you why you are wrong and you should believe my point of view. It's actually arriving at an empathetic understanding through asking questions, and you do that through seeking nuance. When you can understand why people believe what they believe and why they're acting the way they're acting instead of judging them for that, again, you can elucidate new opportunities to work together. And keeping the bigger picture in mind, when you are working on a topic like how to feed 10 billion people by 2050, you can bring unusual people together to share that collective goal, and maybe disagree on how to get there, but through these skills, you can start to find paths forward. And I put a picture here of my friend Patricia, who's CEO of a company called Orbillion Bio. And a lot of these examples I'm giving I see are in the synthetic biology space. It happens to be a sector that I'm super interested in. But Orbillion Bio is a cultivated meat company, and they're focused on actually cultivating, heritage varieties of cattle and bison from the United States. And they're actually like working on varieties that, indigenous populations in the US were growing and herding. But Patricia actually grew up on a farm in Austria, and they, had cattle on her farm. And so she deeply understands what it is like to be in the livestock industry. And she has worked directly with cattle farmers in developing her business. Now, the first question she got when she was going to places like Washington State in the US and meeting with cattle farmers was, excuse me, are you trying to put me out of business? What are you doing? Literally the whole, cultivated meat industry is about, a lot of it has been to date about saying everything that's wrong with livestock farming. And instead she came in and she said, listen, I've been in your shoes and I actually respect very much what you do and I want to learn from you. And so she talked to them, and now she has partnered with them. Can you imagine a cultivated meat company and a livestock company are working together to develop the future of meat? And she actually has what I think is a very interesting perspective on this, but she says, one day I want to go into a butcher and have both products available. And, it can be something that I don't believe that it's an either or discussion, that there's a future where both can coexist. Butchers want, sustainable, healthy products, and so do I. And we can find that commonality and create a better future together. And we can also agree that many of the models of industrial farming are wrong. And that is also a point of, collaboration opportunity. So those are kind of three key skills that can help you embrace a next gen innovation mindset. And I just want to show a couple of other slides. One is to show I see this to life, if you go to the next slide, every single day. Well, sorry, I forgot about this slide, but developing the new technologies and getting investments are only the methods and means, not the end goal. So just remember that when we're innovating, I think a lot of us in entrepreneurship think it's like, we got to get that investment, we got to win, we got to, get the Series A, etc. But actually the goal of what we are trying to do is to make this planet a better place. And so when you remember that, the means of developing the technologies, getting your IP, getting the investments, that's the means to get to this higher goal. And if you can remember that and calibrate against that, phenomenal things can happen. And it's tapping into that higher purpose and that audaciousness of, feeding 10 billion people on a hotter planet by more diverse, inclusive, and collaborative solutions. And the next slide really shows, TFF in action. Our summits are definitely unconventional. They've been described as like the Tomorrowland of food and ag, the South by Southwest of food and ag. But here in the middle are two, community members, Felipe, who runs Renature, which is an agroforestry and regenerative ag-based organization really focused on soil. And, he's hugging Henry, who runs Agritecture, which is urban farming, indoor growing, soilless agriculture. But at TFF, they're coming together and finding out we might be in different fields and doing things very differently, high tech versus back to the land. But the point is we're both here to solve our world's foods challenges. And this is what unites us. So we're remaking our food systems together with the next generations. We're not doing this in a way that's like, we're going to tell the next generations what to do. We're actually creating an environment where we're learning from the next generations. This is not a tokenistic, youth and ag type of approach. This is really like, how are you ticking? What can we learn from you? Let's create space for your new roots and shoots to form so that something better can emerge. And one of the other things we believe in, if you go to the next slide, back to what John mentioned, a really great way if you want to break down barriers and build bridges is to come together and dance. So we believe very much in having fun and dancing and laughing and finding that human connection, because at the end of the day, our humanity is what connects us. So thank you very much, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks, Christine. That was really a brilliant presentation, and just it's such an interesting way to look at the problems that we're all somewhat trying to solve and that are sitting on our desks and the organizations that we're at, and it's really, really interesting work. So thanks. So we've got 10 minutes or so now for Q&A. I have a few questions. If anyone would like to ask us, please go ahead and stick up your hand or jump in and unmute yourself. Maybe to start off, Christine, tell me about how the partnerships work with Ultra Fruit Food. Who's part of the organization? How is it structured?
Yeah, sure. So as mentioned, we have this global community, which has grown to 30,000 millennials and Gen Zs in 175 countries. We work with leaders in the industry. Cargill, DSM, Danone, Google are some of our, main sponsors. But again, it's not here to be they're really here to support our mission as a nonprofit and drive forward next gen innovation in terms of the technologies and solutions, but also these mindset shifts, right? And the new approaches that I was talking about here. And then we also, work with the Rockefeller Foundation and the United Nations, specifically around the UN Food Systems Summit. And I recently joined the advisory committee, and I think it's also worth mentioning that we actually have our first official regional hub in Southeast Asia. So before COVID, I had the chance to travel to Singapore and Malaysia all the time, and I look forward to coming back. So those are kind of some of our partners and how we're structured. We're building out more regional hubs at the very moment in different parts of the world. But yeah, Southeast Asia was our flagship one, and looking forward to coming back and visiting that when it's allowed.
I think we have also a QR code to link to Christine's LinkedIn portfolio. So if anyone has any interest in trying to partner with then they can do so. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Any hands up?
Don't be shy.
Yeah, please jump in or in the chat. Otherwise, I have a few others. Any hands there? Any hands? Okay, Aaron Sweeney. Shy Aaron. Do you want to speak, or should I read it out, Aaron? Okay, Aaron asked, thanks for this great presentation. Could you talk more about some of the nuances you see in next-gen engagement across different regions around the world?
For sure. So I think that there, of course, are different approaches and, you know, insights to next-gen engagement. And maybe like one clarifying question back to you, if that's okay, is like, do you mean in terms of how companies are engaging the next generations, or how next generations are engaging with these topics? I can answer both of them, but maybe if you wouldn't mind just clarifying what you mean and what would be more interesting.
Sure, I'd love to talk about both actually, but the second one was—
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so the second one was how next generations are engaging with food and ag. So I do have some insights, but I would really, really love to hear, you know, from any of you too, who have on the ground experience. But so most of the academic research on millennials and Gen Zs has actually been done by, you know, big consulting organizations and focused a lot on the US and European markets. But that said, we have done our own research, and there has been research done in other parts of the world. And so what I can speak to is, you know, observational, as well as, you know, in a few reports that have come out around next generations in other parts of the world. So in places like the Middle East and Southeast Asia, the concept of entrepreneurship in millennials is definitely interesting, but oftentimes held back because of like pressure from parents and society, right, to kind of follow more traditional career paths, e.g. go to a good school, get a degree, go work for a, you know, globally known organization wherever possible. So that has been like some of the observations. But what has been interesting, again, observational data here, anecdotal, is that in a place like TFF, we've heard time and time again from members in our community from parts of the world where maybe entrepreneurship has been discouraged, is that coming into a community like TFF has really helped them, because they've been able to find their path more easily, and also like make the case back to their parents that, you know, it's okay. I'm still gonna find a life. Here's some examples of other people who have done this, etc. And again, the other challenge that we've had is like in food and ag, this is seen as a, you know, in some parts of the world as like a sector with dismal prospects, right? So bringing a new kind of perspective on what ag and food can be to parts of the world is an important part of what we do, and showing, you know, how lives have been changed and that this can be lucrative and successful, etc. Okay, so that's, you know, one example. Another example is, of course, like access to social media, which we know in some parts of the world, for example, China is you know, a little bit harder. That said, we are seeing that, you know, there have been really exciting and interesting ways for young people to be connecting into global opportunities. I will speak specifically to China to say that this concept of entrepreneurship in a global platform has been like maybe less interesting because the market size in China is so large, but the community, like, so while it might not be so interesting for entrepreneurs in China to say, I want to access, you know, markets in other countries, what we've seen is a very strong interest in accessing the global community to share knowledge, ideas, best practices, and, you know, just kind of insights on the trends, for example, plant-based foods, etc. So those are some, like, you know, examples of differences. I'll also say, like, in places like Africa, where we have a very, very active community. I mentioned the digital divide. This is a very real phenomenon, but you are seeing some super creative leapfrog solutions coming from the next generations that allow them to engage in communities like TFF and others in ways that previous generations, haven't either been able to or interested to. And so there is this leapfrog effect, right? And so that's kind of the insight into how today's young people, no matter where they are in the world, are connecting into food and ag topics and leveraging the value proposition of Thought for Food. Now, in terms of how are like big companies engaging with the next generations, we work with a variety of companies, and it's always it's a bit of an education, including with the big companies, the startups, and the United Nations types entities. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but there is kind of this bias in the world towards young people that tends to either dismiss their ideas as naive or idealistic, or kind of oh, we need to engage with young people because it's, it's a tokenistic action, right? Because we need to check the box that young people need to have, youth is kind of a trendy topic right now. But the kind of message that I'm really trying to bring forward, and I hope is landing, is that it's actually really smart and strategic to engage young people. And this will, for big companies, help to create competitive advantage and social license to operate, and give you innovation that has been unprecedented. So it's not just youth, are, great and filled with energy and passion. It's actually they have exactly the ideas and values that we need. So I hope that answers your question. Happy to, if you would like to continue over, a conversation on socials or emails.
Thanks, Erin. Pranav, I think you have a question. Can I call on you?
Sure, John. And Christine, thank you so much for that presentation. I thought that was absolutely amazing and really enlightening. I wanted to ask if you've seen or noticed a difference in how women in the TFF network are approaching the kind of work that they're doing, and especially if there's a difference between women that are part of, say, Gen Z versus Millennials, or even if you have any insights from Gen C, though recognizing it's a bit early to tell from that.
Yeah, I think Gen C, the jury is still out. We will see. But what I definitely find is that there is really all around the world a more open attitude towards diversity and inclusion. And, we see hustling female founders in TFF, which is fantastic, but also being supported greatly by our community and by their own teams. So this is really for me, a very hopeful sign for the future. And I do want to just say, I recognize very clearly that at TFF, we are working with leaders of the next generation, right? We have the luck and pleasure, but again, if we can take the leadership qualities that they're exhibiting and help to mainstream those, I feel that's going to be a phenomenal force for change in the world. There's a definite just to I think because it's kind of related, Cassidy is asking, do you see them pursuing activism through entrepreneurship, or more skeptical of it as a way to create change? I definitely, because I think it links to your question, Pranav, is that so where there is skepticism is kind of, again, in this people saying things and not backing it up with real actions and change. And so you're seeing an interest in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial methods, but not in building startups that are just unicorns and investment and winner takes all, right? This is changing. So the, kind of stuff 0 to 1 and the winner takes all mentality that was very pervasive, in kind of the late stage millennial years, is now being shifted towards how do you make business beautiful? How do you make business more inclusive? How do you use entrepreneurial methods, e.g. bootstrapping, failing forward, et cetera, but to build a better society and a better world. And that includes including women and diverse founders, and also developing new business models. I've been learning, and this is what I think is super important for leaders, because I'm old now. And like I said, I'm just here to kind of learn from the next generations and create space for them. But I've been learning a lot from them about new business models that are really focused on sharing benefits back with the world, versus this kind of like traditional value capture systems, and open source, which I'm proud of Millennials because we kind of like forged the path for open source in other sectors, but now that's kind of being looked at in food and ag innovation. You saw my slide about open source cells for like cultured meat products. Like these are things that are kind of like really happening. And so, yeah, I would just say it's business as unusual, but using business mindsets and methodologies, but to create systemic change, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm putting some questions in the chat like directly. Do you want me to answer
Yeah.
them? Yeah.
Yeah, Pranav had a follow-on question that's relevant to WOMAG as well, which is how an organization like WOMAG would pivot directly to Gen Z.
How would WOMAG pivot?
Yeah, pivot direct. Yeah.
Well, I think it's by kind of like creating space to explore some of the new like phenomenons around these types of solution spaces. So like I said, how can you depolarize complex discussions? How can you invite more collaboration and multispectral thinking into how you're pursuing discussions? I think like, yeah, those are some of the, I mean, obviously too, inviting Gen Z speakers, and creating Gen Z focused experiences. We know too that the next generations are on a lifelong quest for knowledge and mentorship. This is like so important as you're building out organizations. So, and I just want to reiterate, I'm not here to say, let's leave it to the next generations. I'm not here to just be like, it's young people or nothing. We have to build bridges of support and understanding between generations, between expertise and naivete, you know, and that, again, that's called a multispectral thinking. It's like connecting those in fresh new ways that haven't been seen before. And I think the other thing is like, we recently were part of food systems dialogues, right, that are taking place in the lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit. And we were curating and inviting a lot of young people to join these dialogues. And whether due to cultural reasons or age, a lot of times the young people felt like they didn't really they weren't invited to speak up and you know, to share their perspectives. They were intimidated. So how do we like create that space? How do we allow that to happen? Train young people, you know, and by train, it's also not telling them this is how you have to make your voice heard, but actually allowing them to make their voice heard in the ways that they know how. If it's a little bit more informal than what you're used to, that's okay. There's still some validity. So this is about that open-mindedness to not just like what they're saying, but maybe how they're saying it, and seeing that they're, you know, somebody I was talking to recently was like dismissing TikTok as like garbage and what can you really learn in 30 seconds? And I'm like, so much. There's like literally, you can go on TikTok and like learn about these complicated topics in 30-second segments. And it's, you know, just keep an open mind. It's, you know, ask questions instead of judging and say, how does this work? And, you know, maybe there's things to be learned. And maybe there's also things that the next generations can learn by you asking them the questions, because that's a super cool phenomenon of asking questions, is sometimes when there is something wrong in a perspective that someone has, by asking them about it and having them think about it and explain themselves, they arrive at that conclusion themselves, which is a more powerful way to change minds than to tell someone they're wrong, is to have that person arrive at that themselves, you know? So I believe in the power of asking questions.
We have a question here from Ranti, which kind of relates back to what you were saying, is how did this year's event go, which is a wider question, and then specifically how is it adapted for COVID?
Yeah, so we hold our summits. It's a flagship part of our program. We were actually planning to have our summit last March in Southeast Asia, but of course, plans went out the air, just like they did for everyone. So that was a big bummer, because we were planning to bring our global community to your part of the world, and had this whole like extravaganza set up to explore food systems, from rice fields to rainforests, as well as agri-tech and cities. But we pivoted like everybody did, and we went completely virtual. But we took a unique perspective, and this is another insight I learned from digital natives, is that, user experience is core to how new products are developed for the digital world. So we actually apply UX to every event that we organize. So we think through the perspective of the audience and participant, and you have to do that in digital events and virtual events. So we said, nobody wants another Zoom meeting. You know, this was in October 2020, you know, with kind of like bad audio and, you know, frozen screens. So we went all in on the production, high production value, made a TV show, very, you know, embodying of the TFF spirit and energy. You can actually check it out. It's on our website. It's under the demo day tab. And we had, of course, startup pitches. A lot of them came from Southeast Asian teams covering all kinds of great solution spaces in food and ag, whether it be plant-based proteins, whether it be aquaculture, whether it be agri-tech or digital ag. All of those solution spaces were covered in the pitches. But in addition, we brought some energy. And so we had DJs and dancers and speakers and roundtables. And it was just like a very special broadcast. And we ended up organizing watch parties all around the world. So we had 15,000 people tune in on October 16th, which is World Food Day, from 140 countries. That was so humbling, you know, to see people in places that I have never been, you know, watching our production show, and, you know, again, uniting the world for this shared cause. So go check that out if you have time. It looks longer than it is. It says it's a 3-hour show, but that's just because the DJ set at the end is quite long. But it's worth it. You can also watch it in episodes. But yeah, it was a good. And so what are we planning for 2021 is actually, we're gonna do an in-person event in Europe because it's kind of the safest bet for our team, which is based here. But we are organizing satellite events, including one in Southeast Asia and in other key parts of the world. So stay tuned for more information, and we'd love to have you involved. It's gonna be really epic because we've partnered with the UN and the Food and Agriculture Organization. And yeah, we're gonna make something special.
Cool, thanks. So we just put the website link in the chat there. So Tano, next question. I know we've gone over. If it's okay, we'll go to the hour. Christine is maybe
perfect. Yeah,
10 minutes. So of course, people can jump off. Another question from Tano from World Vision Cambodia. Thanks. I have a question. How can we help young generations to engage more in agriculture, while particularly in Cambodia, the young people are more interested in the industrial sector? And any particular model you would like to recommend for further learning? It's a great question.
I would love to connect with you. Yeah, we actually just finished on Friday last week our Thought for Food Global Challenge, which is our call to action that really does excite people everywhere in the world to get involved in food and ag and submit solutions. But not only submit them, we actually support them in creating solutions. So our process is that we get people excited about food and ag, we connect them with the community and resources, and we help them develop solutions from the ground up that are local. We had several teams join because it's kind of like, and this was feedback we got about our event in October, was what really is exciting for young people is to see people from their home countries and their stories told on the global stage. And this was like, it's like the Olympics of food and ag. They were like, oh my gosh, that could be me. How do I do this? So that's exactly our model. And we've set up a structure where we have ambassadors all around the world. We have 500 of them. We have regional coordinators, which serve as our leadership team. And through that, we're able to run our programs in every region. And again, excite people about food and ag, develop solutions, and then showcase those solutions to the world, and thereby create this like engine of excitement and innovation that is, hopefully creating this wave of change in the world that we need. We need more minds bringing fresh perspectives and new ideas that are locally relevant in every part of the world. So do connect with me, because we did have several participants from Cambodia, which I'd love to connect you to. And it's just so fascinating. I've been spending, literally till 2 o'clock in the morning over the weekend up until yesterday, going through our submissions. We had a record-breaking year this year. And just to see the diversity of types of solutions and the real impact that can be made through sometimes very simple solutions, right? But that are really meaningful because they're working directly with growers, or they're working on a problem in their community. And through TFF, they're connecting with this ecosystem of support that can help them to scale in a new type of sense, right? Scale ideas, best practices, and more. So, yeah.
Another question, so a related question from Josipa, which is which is about how a kind of manager can engage with younger generations.
Yeah, great question. Well, so there's one concrete way that you can, through the TFF organization, is that we have a mentorship program. It's really, easy, and we accommodate mentors because we understand like so many people are, busy with their jobs and families, etc. But like, if you do have time and interest, like mentorship is a great way for us to connect you with young people who are seeking out expertise in a specific area, but also just like people who can help support them and guide them, and kind of nurture their confidence and things like this. So that's one concrete way. And I think too, what I was able to do when I worked at a big agribusiness Syngenta was I set up a program called Next Gen Innovation. I established that role myself. And so if you're in a company and want to talk about this, like do get in touch. But what in this role I was able to do, the value proposition, I reported to business development, ventures, and corporate affairs. And basically I was scouring the planet for great ideas, great talents, and great startups, and bringing them into the company. But through discovering those great ideas, great talents, and great startups, I was also helping the company understand how to engage and connect with young people. And we ended up setting up a youth development program, or a next gen development program in Syngenta that was, again, really not in a tokenistic way, but connecting them into leadership conversations, etc. So again, happy to share some of the best practices there in case that's of interest.
Great. And then second last question, one from Erica. Imagine you have somebody with a groundbreaking idea on changing productivity in rice, but the person is older than 40. How to proceed to get heard by TFF? Oh,
by the way, so this is like, I would love everyone's help on this. When I talk about next generation innovation, yes, there is a large part of what we do that is about solving the age gap that is pervasive in the sector, because the average age of the world's farmer is, over 60. But I actually mean it in a very like figurative sense. It's the next generation mindset, right? That anyone of any age in any type of like stage of their life can adopt and use. So Erica, I would love to hear about your idea. I would love to champion that through TFF. There's a space for you in TFF. It's about the next generation mindset, not just literally the next generation. And the challenge that we run, of course, is to showcase next gen ideas, but that doesn't, it's just because we're, again, trying to foster opportunities for the next generations, but there's space for us to tell great examples from anyone of any age, and also to champion those examples and mainstream them. That next generation mindset and innovation opportunity.
And we're just coming to the hour. So I'll ask the last question, Christine. So you're an ambassador for the UN Food System Summit. Yeah. So how did that come about? What does that position mean? And your thoughts on actually the UN and how it engages with youth? Is it kind of a positive engagement from the UN, or is it, as you say, it's that kind of token engagement that can exist with some companies?
I think that like all organizations everywhere do have a lot of growth around, meaningful engagement on all kinds of fronts, right? Whether that be with youth, whether that be with other types of groups and stakeholders. But I have seen some really exciting movement in this year's UN Food Systems Summit. So for example, the summit structure, this is the UN, so it's a very formalized kind of process and structure, but they have these action tracks, 5 of them, that are led by, leading organizations around specific areas of interest that they're trying to drive action around for this summit. Each of those action tracks has a youth co-chair. So they've actually invited youth to have a leadership into a very, strategic aspect of this. They also have a champions network with a big youth constituency. So this is what I think is so exciting about this, is they have heard the alarm bells, like we need to engage youth, and it is happening. I think every organization still has, ways to go to do this, and we have to accelerate this given the scale and urgency of the problems. But we're seeing some great signs, and even conversations like today, understanding the next generations is, I think, just a really important thing we all should take the time to do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So thanks really again for your time, Christine. It was really fascinating for everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And please, here are the QR codes for both WOMAG and for Christine's LinkedIn connection on Prop for Food. So have a great rest of the week, everyone, and see you at the next WOMAG event. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks
you again,
Bye,
Christine.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Christine.
Jessica.
Bye. I'm just typing it.